If you caught my first ever YouTube short last week, you'll have caught me unboxing this, which is the Playdate from Panic and Teenage Engineering. It's a handheld gaming console with two very unique features. One of those features is this, the crank, and the other one I'll get onto later. But is this a genuinely innovative take on mobile gaming, or is it just one of those huge gimmicks that's going to end up in the drawer that you store your batteries in, your manuals, and your spare change? Let's find out. So, Playdate is a collaboration between Panic, which is an awesome independent software developer behind apps like Transmit, Nova, and games such as Untitled Goose Game, and Teenage Engineering, which is a Swedish company who are perhaps best known for their awesome audio products. On the back of the box, we're told that Playdate was made just for fun. And that's immediately apparent. Everything from the website, to the box, like I say, to the unboxing experience, not to mention this little guy himself, is just playful, cute, and really endearing. If you're like me, you see Playdate and you just want one immediately. In terms of size, it's about half the size of an S22 Ultra. It feels a bit plasticky, but generally well put together, and the buttons feel pleasingly clicky. And on the subject, obviously, of inputs, beyond the D-pad and the A and B button, you do get what I mentioned earlier, which is this little crank. And this is really the Playdate's party trick. Spins around like this, and then you can very neatly place it back into the case. Powering this thing is a 180 MHz Cortex M7 processor, 16 gig of RAM, and games are stored on the 4 GB of internal flash. As for the display, it is a 400 by 240 1-bit panel. Like I said, it's so cute, this thing. There are some issues with the display, which I'll come on to later, but in terms of battery, it lasts a solid 8 hours in play, which I think is about right, and they claim 14 days of standby time, which I'm not entirely sure about, but I'll get onto that later as well. In the box, you get a color-coded USB-C to USB-A cable, a handy little guide, and that's it. And the price for all that stuff is $179. In the future, you'll also be able to grab a stereo dock, which turns the Playdate into a Bluetooth speaker while it's charging, and a neat little foldable cover that protects the screen. But after you've unboxed it, things really do get off to a good start with what is possibly the most enjoyable first boot sequence I've ever experienced on a device like this. And it basically encourages you to navigate around the screen with the buttons, the D-pad, and that all-important crank. And this is where you first get your experience of the sound effects and just the fluidity of the animation, which are an absolute joy. For me, it immediately felt like a modern take on the kind of monochrome handheld consoles I used to use as a kid. So that first out-of-the-box setup experience really gets you excited for what might be to come when you actually start playing games on this thing. Let's hope it doesn't let us down. So if you thought the crank was unique, wait until you get a load of how you get games onto this thing. So once you've unboxed Playdate and connected it to your Wi-Fi network, it'll immediately download 2 games that you can start playing right away. It then continues to serve you brand new games every single night for 12 weeks. And when it does, you'll wake up to a kind of gently flashing LED like that and a little notification on the screen to say that new games are available. Panic calls this Season 1 and it's included within the price of the Playdate, so you don't have to pay a monthly fee to get access to those 24 games. That's pretty generous in my book, but even Panic admits that you probably won't love all of the games that arrive on your Playdate. They even say some are short, some are long, but you will have fun trying them out. And in my experience, that's true. I think it's a really innovative way to serve games to a device like this, and it completely gets rid of the need for a game store either on the device itself or on a different device where you'd need to copy the games across. It's completely frictionless, but it also has that all-important cliffhanger factor where you wait for the next game to arrive on your device. There's no news on Season 2 just yet, but Panic does say that they're working on it at the moment. It's also worth noting that you can actually sideload games onto this that aren't part of the season. And there's even an SDK for creating your own Playdate games, which is, again, really encouraging. And I think hopefully that will result in a bunch of games that are outside of the season that you can, if you're that way inclined, you can either make them yourself or you can grab them if you run out of patience with the 24 games that you get with this. Now, Panic were kind enough to let reviewers like myself get a kind of condensed access to Season 1, so over the last week or so we've been served all 24 games one day after the other just to give us a chance to have a play with them, and I've been doing just that. Admittedly, I've not played every single game in Season 1 yet because there are so many of them, but I have tried a few of them out and there's a pleasing mix of different gaming styles in there. For instance, Hyper Meteor is fun, it's very simple to use, you use the crank to kind of fly your little spaceship around the screen to smash into enemies. It's a bit like Space Invaders but with, well, more crank ability. Then there's Casual Birder, which is a little bit too long-winded for me. There's lots of kind of storytelling involved and an unsatisfyingly difficult take on camera operation, which involves using the crank to focus on birds. But it does have a certain amount of character there, and it has this kind of intrigue in the story which makes you want to keep on playing. It's just not the sort of game that I would play myself. There are some slightly more frustrating games in there. So for instance, Whitewater Wipeout requires a serious amount of patience just to learn how to play the damn thing. And that's because there aren't really any gameplay instructions. And this does seem to be a bit of a theme with some of the Playdate games where they don't really tell you how to play them. And that's fine to a degree, but it just means there's sometimes a bit too much self-discovery required. And I just got really fed up with Whitewater Wipeout. I could not get my character to stay on the surfboard at all. I don't know why, it just seemed impossible. I'm sure it's not, I just did not have the patience to stick with it. I did quite like Time Travel Adventure, which is this kind of immediately playable and addictively hard game. It sees you using the crank to control the dating fate of the main character, which sounds a bit odd, but if you spin the crank forward, he dashes towards his potential forever partner, spin it backwards, and you can avoid the many obstacles that are kind of placed in his way. It's one of those real start, stop, swear and try again type games, and if you're wondering, I didn't get past the 5th date, which I don't think is that bad. Now, I do need to make my way through the rest of the games on Season 1, but these days I'm the kind of gamer who just wants the kind of pick up and play ability. I haven't really got time for long, story-driven games. But if that's your thing, I have a feeling the likes of Casual Birder and the countless other story-driven titles on Season 1 are really going to be up your street. Equally, if you're more like me, things like Hyper Meteor and Time Travel Adventure are pretty fun companions when you've got a bit of time to spare. Now, I think Panic has scored a home run with this in terms of wantability. Playdate is just undeniably cute and it looks great wherever you place it, which makes it perfect for B-roll. And when people spot it, they always want to know what it is, what it does, and what on earth that thing is. I think the graphics and sound capabilities of the Playdate are wonderfully nostalgic and modern at the same time. I love the premise behind the season of games as well. It feels a little bit like waiting for the next release from your favourite band. You don't know what's going to come. You know that you might love it, you might hate it, or equally, it might be a bit of a grower. And I think the crank is more than just a gimmick as well. Most of the games that I've tried implement it really well. It never feels forced, and it gives plenty of kind of micro adjustability to make it a really satisfying way to control characters and stuff on the screen. I think at $179, you're getting quite a lot for your money with the Playdate. It's built really well, the plastic doesn't feel too cheap, and those 24 games that you get in Season 1 are a really nice sweetener. But it isn't all roses, I'm afraid. The biggest problem with the Playdate is one of its most important aspects, and it's the screen. It's just too dark unless you're in a very bright room. I think the lack of a backlight on the Playdate is just a huge miss by Panic. Personally, I'd happily pay a little bit more and perhaps lose 2 or 3 hours of battery life just to see a screen that I can actually see in a darker room. I just don't quite get the thinking behind not including a backlight. They even reference it on the homepage of the website right at the top, which clearly means that it's on their mind and they're probably expecting or may already have received a bit of backlash about it. The ergonomics of the Playdate are a little bit questionable as well. So as cute as this kind of squared off design is, it's not always particularly comfortable to hold during long gaming sessions, and particularly when you're using that crank. I'm not entirely sure how they can solve that apart from making the thing longer and perhaps slightly softening the edges, but again, that would kind of lose some of the cuteness. So it really is a bit of a double-edged sword in that respect. The crank itself, although it's nicely designed and feels nice and tough, I wish there's a bit more resistance. It just feels a little bit too slippery, which does impact some of the playability of certain games. So yeah, a bit more resistance would have been nice. I'm also not convinced that the 14 days of standby time is accurate for the battery. The in-use time, the kind of 8 hours, I think is probably about right. But in my experience, if I leave this for 2 or 3 days without use, it tends to run the battery down. There's also no firm indication of what's going to happen with Season 2 of the games. If not enough people buy the Playdate, at worst, we may never see Season 2, which means if you're buying one of these today, you're putting quite a lot of trust in Panic to come good on that one. So in summary, if you're after a little pocket entertainment machine and like the sound of the addictive Season 1 game delivery system, the Playdate isn't a bad way to spend $179. Just prepare yourself for the inevitable disappointment when you first see the screen. If you've still got a thirst for interesting gadget reviews, keep watching for a link to my full review of an electric bike. Are they a fad or are they worth it? Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you next time.